GLSL or something, it's done kind of defined a little bit differently. But then there's like little clever things. So if you take, for example, the fill color, and let's say we want to subtract the hue. So we take this color and then we like take the hue and -10. When I print out the fill color again, it actually prints out differently. So here, first time I print it out, it says red, green, blue. And then when I like interact with the hue, when I print it out, it says hue, saturation, lightness. So this is what I assume is happening, is that it's like this smart object that it's like paper.js is like, oh, okay, you care about the hue, so let me convert the object to do something differently. There's some smart stuff that's happening behind the scenes. I don't exactly understand. Yeah.
I mean, basically, it just assumes the moment you want to work with hue, then
yeah,
it just assumes that you want HSL or HSP as both, but then you want to, yeah, I mean, it just takes time to do that. That has that property, and then it converts it to it and realizes the same. You can convert it back to RGB, but
yeah,
in the end, it will always be an RGB or conventional drawing.
Yeah. So here, for example, like I can change the hue, and then I can look with the red, and then it's like, you know, it's like back to being a red, green, and blue object. I have no idea what's going on, but for me, that is like, okay, there's something smart that's happening here, which is like you can, you know, sort of muck around with things, and there's some smart brains that is like, oh, you care about hue, I'll convert it to a HSV value, or you care about red, you know, convert it back to RGB. So I like that. Like that's the kind of thing I think it's like it's doing this sort of smart thing where you don't have to think about it. Like in processing, you usually have to set the color mode, or sometimes you have to think about these things. And I like the idea that you don't have to think.
Yeah.
You can just.
A lot of these things actually come from how you work in Illustrator, describing design programs in the user interface. If you want to, you know, you can convert colors like that as well, just by changing your palette in the user interface, by entering the red value against an RGB. And we felt like for teachability, I mean, it might be magic and kind of confusing to a programmer, but to people who start programming, it's actually the other way around. It's more logical. So, because it's just a color. I mean, who cares if it's an RGB or a textual representation of the color.
Sorry, it's live right now if you want to share the link.
Oh, okay.
Oh, cool. Wait, so.
It's live on YouTube. I sent the link to Zach.
Wow.
Maybe some tweets it, like retweet it. Okay.
Do you have a?
Can you put the camera closer?
Oh, close. My USB is not that well. It's not. I can't do it wireless. But yeah, the sound quality is pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it just has some delay, so it's not actually live. It has like 10-second delay.
Oh, wow.
It has like 10, 20 seconds. Like a minute, maybe a minute delay.
As long as the sound and the image is in sync.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, let me keep going. Do you want me to tweet this out?
Yeah.
I think the screen should be more in
Yeah, I can't. Oh, I can move there probably.
yeah.
All right, let me move there.
Be cool. Yeah, if you want to.
Yeah, I think you should tweet the link.
Oh, there I'm waving. Look at that. Okay. Just confusing here. All right. Okay. Well, another thing that I think is really kind of fascinating. That's sort of important to know when you create an object. So this circle object, bar circle, is a new path circle. There's something that's really, really important, which is called fully selected. And this is the sort of thing that, like, if you're familiar with Illustrator, this will make you feel right at home. Which is this idea where when you create an object in paper.js, you can select it. So it's like when you select an object in Illustrator, it shows you the points, it shows you the control handles, it like gives you some information about it. And this is really useful, like when you do in the examples, like the hit test example, like here, this makes me feel like I'm like interacting with the illustrator. I'm interacting with these objects, and these objects I can actually see the vector information that makes up these objects. So I think that's a kind of important.
We even stole style from Adobe.
Yeah.
Just so you know, I mean, you feel it all.
Yeah, it's an important component. So, so fully selected is really useful, and I'm going to quickly. So the other thing is when you create an object, you can also create it like more explicitly. So there's like shorthand ways of writing things in Paper.js where you can just say, I want a new circle, and you kind of like, you like are familiar with how to write it without saying the words. And then there's a longhand way of writing it, which is if you're used to JavaScript, it's like actually a kind of, you know, like JavaScript object notation. Like you're kind of defining, you know, like these are, if you're used to working with, you know, JavaScript, this should be more familiar to you, where you're kind of with the, I'm not a JavaScript person, but with the curly brackets, you're like, you know, creating the key value pairs, etc. So here you're saying like the center is 150, 100, the radius is 55, the fill color is pink. And some of this could get like increasingly more complex. Like you could define functions inside of this where you say like on frame and tell the object what to do, you know, for a given frame. But just so you sometimes you'll see me like define in my code, sometimes you'll see me write it like this is the shorthand. This would be similar if you've used processing before. You say like, I want to draw a circle at 100, 100 with a radius of 100 or something like that. But then there's a more like, I would say that this other style is maybe like a more kind of idiomatic JavaScript style, where when you create the object, you are filling out a kind of, I don't know, am I saying it right? It's like JSON. Or it's like a JavaScript object.
Yeah, the object literals they call it, I think.
Object literal. So you're actually say like the center is this, the radius is this, the fill color is this, and kind of defining it. And it's a little bit more verbose, but I like it because it's also like, you know, like more readable in some way. So this is going to create a circle which is pink and has a radius of 55, or we can have a radius of 100, right? So
you can also kind of just consider it like named parameters, but they're not really, but that's the only way you can do it, or sort of fake them. I mean, those who know Ruby, they know named parameters, right? It just seemed like a helpful way, even in examples, you need less comments. Yeah. And that's one thing that people sometimes criticize about processing, that when you don't know what the parameters are, it's kind of cryptic. I think Brett Victor was
yeah, if you have
like about that.
Like parameter 1, comma parameter 2, comma parameter 3, comma parameter 4. When you go to use it, it's really hard to like know which parameter you're referring to. So
and one more thing, you can actually you can set any attribute on the object that is about to be created. You can already put that into this object literal. So anything like the color or stroke width or cap, it'll go through that. It'll read the standard values, and then it'll go through everything else and set it on the object. It's not the fastest way to do it, because it involves a loop. So it's readable, but then it's less fast as the other notation that you see. Yeah. But a lot of people like this, and we added this later on. It didn't exist in the beginning, and this is why you get both. Kind of.
Yeah. So I tend to use this because it's just easier to. I feel like, okay, I'm really like a JavaScript programmer when I'm doing it this way. Just feels like JavaScript. All right, so the thing that I want to show you is that you have sort of core things where we have paths, we have layers, we have groups. We'll be creating all of our objects will be paths, so we'll like make circles or squares or stars or whatever shapes we make. We'll be using paths, and this is similar to like when you use the pen tool in Illustrator. You're just defining paths. They could be open or closed. They could be, you know, filled or not filled. And then you have groups and layers. And maybe you can explain the difference between groups and layers, but I see it like mentally, I see it a little bit like in in Illustrator, you can create groups. So you can take like 5 objects and you can group them together. Then you can control some, you can like select them all and then move them all. And then layers is like more serious. Like you are creating separate, levels of like a sandwich of a, they're like layers in the Illustrator file, and then you can actually turn them on and off. I mean, you can do that with groups as well, but the layers for me feels like a more serious grouping. But I don't know if you have a...
Yeah, I mean, layers are basically the only elements that you can add to a project. Like the project just has a layers list. And so even if you don't create the layer, you actually start with just one layer, and that's the active layer. So project.active layer. It didn't show project object yet, but
no,
we couldn't call it document. That's what we wanted to call it, but so we chose project, and that's kind of like what the document is in the browser. Is the project in Paper.js, and then it'll have a list of layers, and then you can also nest layers within other layers.
Yeah.
But they really behave like groups. There's some differences if you mark things as selected. Layers behave a little bit differently to groups, but it's in a way the same thing. And in SVG, you only have groups. So when you export it as SVG, a layer will become a group. And when you re-import it, it'll be a group. So
interesting.
SVG is not really meant to be as your data model for storing and loading things. It's more like an export-import thing. If you want to store things, let's say you want to make an image editor and you would like to save your data and load it again, then you need to use JSON. JSON will preserve everything. It will be completely the same scene graph. With SVG, that's not guaranteed because we can't map everything one-to-one. A lot of things we can, but not all of them. And we might be able to improve that through like added attributes, but at the moment it's not.
Yeah. So the important thing to know is like when you draw something right away, when you create a circle or whatever kind of like thing that you're going to draw, it gets added to the active layer, which is whatever is the last layer that's been created. So if you create a layer and then you create some graphical thing after that, that thing gets attached to that layer. So it's kind of like, I guess, a state model where you create a layer and then anything you draw or create gets added to that layer. So here I just want to show a very basic example where we'll create a layer. So when you have this active layer. There's a layer that's already created for you, but we can create a new layer called second layer. And then I like to inspect things. So I recommend, if you're curious at all, when you start programming in Paper.js, if you create something like a layer, you can actually inspect it. So I'm going to hit run. I like say console.log layer. It like prints out really like pleasantly here. I don't know what that means.
And then memory address or 90.
Yeah, and then I like go to the actual console.log. And then I love this, like if you're a JavaScript nerd, you like to just hang out and kind of look at objects. And I like poke around, okay, look at all the stuff I can do. There's all these things that a layer has. And then, okay, hey, look at that, layer has children. These are the children that are in that layer. And there's one which is, this is the first circle, this is the second circle. So as you draw something, like as you create that, and when I say draw, I just mean create the object, it gets added to that layer. So
I should say something about this. Actually, what you've seen a lot of underscores, right? Mm-hmm. And that's our convention of marking properties that are internal. So you can, of course, get those because there's no private in JavaScript, or not really. But you're not really supposed to get these directly or modify them. It's not guaranteed to work, basically. What we're using in Paper.js heavily is accessors. So things that look like a normal data property, but they're actually getters and setter functions behind them. And so what Zach showed you before with the color, where he said hue, but it actually converts itself. That's through an accessor. Those who know Ruby, will know this as well. I think Python also has this. Java doesn't, and C++ also doesn't have hue. So for us, it was just a way of adding a lot of these magic moments, kind of like where it feels like you're just working with properties and attributes, but actually behind the scenes, it does these kind of helpful actions for you.
Yeah,
that's a good thing to know.
I had no idea. I just thought I was interested. Well,
but that's good actually. I mean, in a way, you didn't need to know, and it was fine. Like so,
So here we've made a circle, this blue circle. We made a layer. which is going to be like, it's almost like creating a new layer in Illustrator, and then we made 2 more circles. And then I'm going to call a function called send to back on the layer. So just so you see like the draw, I keep saying draw, the order that you create these objects, that's the order, that's kind of their draw order, right? You know, they're layered on top of each other. So, you know, this object will be on top of this one will be on top of this one. And we can call second layer that sent to back, and now it's like very similar to what if you were an Illustrator and you took that layer and just said like send to back. Like it's very, I said before, it feels like you're an Illustrator. It's a lot of the same naming, same visual clues, etc. There's other things that are kind of interesting. So you can define, we'll talk about different sort of functions. You can define functions for objects. You can define, there's also sort of more global functions, but you can create a function for example, tell the layer to rotate or tell the layer to do something. So onFrame is like an update function. We'll create an onFrame function which is not associated with an object, but it must be like associated with the whole sketch or
with the view actually.
With the view,
Sets it on the view.
Yeah. So here, for example, you know, we tell the second layer onFrame, and then this dot rotate, and it's going to rotate by 3 degrees every frame. Or we can rotate by 1 degree every frame. So, and you'll notice that it's rotating kind of around the center. It auto computes when you have a layer. It auto computes like the center position, and it's basically the center of the center of the bound.
The bounding box. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like there's a bounding box, and then it's finding the center point, and that's what's rotating around.
It's called bounds. Yeah.
So whenever you make a new layer, it becomes the active layer.
Yes.
And when you make a new path, it gets added to whatever layer is currently active.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's going to be a global setting that allows you to turn this off, that it gets added automatically. Because sometimes you want to do that. You want to not add it to the document object model, or you want to add it explicitly. So you can switch the mode basically, and it will be only affecting new objects.
But there's no way to like specify which. If you want to, or you ever want to add something to the non-active layer.
Oh yeah, you could. Yeah, and then you have add child.
Yeah, there's functions that you can call like add child, remove child, get next like siblings. Like if you're used to working with DOMs, there's like a lot of functions that are about sort of traversing the children or.
Yeah, is there a global, or does Paper.js expose a global object that allows you to inspect the whole sketch or view? The same way that we have layers?
I mean, how do you mean with inspect? You mean like in the debugger, or?
Yeah, I guess in the debugger or something that we can manipulate without the use of Paper.js.
Well, I mean, the thing is, if you inspect the actual drawing surface, right? In like let's say web inspector, you will always see a canvas of it, right?
Right.
So you don't get you don't see the hierarchies.
How do you inspect the?
So you have to do it in code.
Right.
I think what Zach was doing is actually the best way of doing it. It's like you set a debugger and then it'll pull up the.
Yeah. I've done in the past when I want to understand a layer or a whole scene, I'll use console.log, I'll print out the object and kind of poke around the object. There's also like kind of useful functionality in the sketch tool where you can interact with the thing. So you can click on something, it becomes selected, you get like information about the bounding box. You can also, if you're like really, want to understand what you've created like from a more JavaScript perspective, there's a tool for actually exporting it as JSON. So you can get the whole like JSON representation of this current scene. You can also import the JSON, but this is what I said that Paper.js has a model of your world, that this is what I think that model is, or that's a snapshot of that model at that time. You can export the JSON data that sort of describes how everything is working.
Right, but is there a way to get this without having to export it and having to look at it?
Not at the moment. I mean, to explain really quickly,
Yes.
My dream for Sketch is basically that it turns into this mini Illustrator, or like basically like Illustrator with all tools removed. So it already started. I have the black arrow, the magnifying glass, and some import-export functions. But I would like to add more, and the layer palette is one of those things where I can expand, open and close each layer, and sort of see what is the scene growth. in a palette window over there. So what you see right now with Sketch is really early days in a way, and I'm hoping to soon get more time to work on this. But at the moment, that's what you get.
There's other functions that I find really useful. So on mouse drag, it's really easy to make items in Paper.js draggable. So that's one thing that I find really useful for debugging or just interacting, is that I can say, I want the layer when the mouse drag event happens, I want to set the position, I want to add the delta, which is just the drag event delta, which is the change in mouse position. So this is really simple for like quickly. I want to like build. I want to build a tool where I can like grab a layer and drag it or something like that. I find this quite useful. I use this a lot when I'm like debugging, or I just want to see like I've made something, I want to be able to interact with it in some way and sort of see how it might move. So this dot position plus equals event dot delta. You'll get to know these events. Like we'll use onFrame to animate, and then that event for onFrame has some information like the current time and like the current frame count and things like that. So in this case, there's a property called delta, which must be the change in mouse position. Yeah.
Short, kind of silly question about layers. So this talk about the bounding boxes got me thinking. How do you set the layers background color, or is there something that you don't really do?
Well, my answer the way you do a background color is you create a rectangle. So like the answer to everything in Paper.js is create another path. And so it's like the same way you would do a background color in Illustrator, you would draw a rectangle, like a big filled rectangle.
So you'd have to draw it large enough that conceivably doesn't move off the screen, like so that you would have to.
Yeah, I mean, you could you could create a rectangle for the whole view, for example, that would fill the whole canvas, background color. We could do that if you want to see, you'll see how bad I am. So background equals new path rectangle. I cannot, I know circle.
View bounds. Oh, see.
Top, oh God.
You can just do rectangle actually. You can pass it a rectangle object. So
Okay.
Today we need to go through this.
So what do I do?
or just view bounds.
Okay. Oh yeah. Smart. View.bounds. Okay. New path rectangle view.bounds. bg.set fill color equals light green. Boom. That's kind of what you were asking?
Yeah. I guess I was sort of thinking of like, now when you have interactive elements and they move around the screen, then your background color is a rectangle, so it's actually not really a background color. So it might actually use the illusion of the background color if it moves off the screen.
Oh yeah, I think you would typically have like that, the background in the layer, which is not moving. Yeah. So here, for example, if I put this back in, that's in the second layer. I could put this path also in the second layer, so that background will stay in the first layer, and then if I like move this thing, that rectangle stays.
If you want it really to be really fast, I would recommend just doing it in HTML on the body tag. I mean, in CSS. Sure. And the canvas is transparent, so it'll show through. That would be the fastest way of doing the background color.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's not part of the library because in a way you are in the browser, and so we kind of don't want to duplicate functionality.
Yeah. And I've seen people like interact with the paper script sketch and use CSS. So for example, like in our thing, you see that black background, you see those dots moving, that's CSS. The background is colored black by CSS, and we're not drawing a big black rectangle for that. So, all right. So a couple of other things that I think are sort of useful to know is that you can access the children. So let's go back, let's get rid of this background, boom, boom, back to normal. And then we've created this layer, we've added two circles to the layer, and then we can say second layer dot children, and children is an array of the elements, and then you can say, you know, take the second layer's first child and set the fill color to be green. So this is taking, you know, elements, the first child, and doing something with it, right? You can access it's like this nested relationship where you say, like, I want to take the first child and do, yeah.
Sorry if I missed this, but
Yeah.
so when you call the like this dot rotate,
Yeah.
there's not like a set origin. It's relative to all the elements on that layer. It seems like.
It's by default, the center is the center point of the bounds. But you have a P, how do you say it?
You say pivot. You said it's a pivot in French. I don't know what he's saying. Pivot. How do you say it in French?
Pivot.
Pivot. We were talking yesterday, and he was saying pivot, and I could have so confused. But you can set a pivot point. So you can actually, like, if you don't set a pivot point, by default, it's the center of the bounds.
Right.
And
it changes as you change the bounds as well.
yeah, if you add a new element that's like way off screen, you know, it'll center point will change. So it's super different. It's really different. Like, I'm so used to teaching people how to do rotation with push and pop matrix. And here you don't think about that at all. You just think about pivot points, which is very similar to in Illustrator, where you're like, I have a group and I can do rotate, and it rotates from the center. So
yeah, I mean, behind the scenes, it is using matrices or affine transformations, and you can work with them if you want. I mean, they're all there. It's something a bit weird and it freaks people out a lot. Is that we're by default baking every transformation into the content if you can. So, which means, let's say you have a path which consists of Bezier curves or segments. When you transform this path, it's not just storing the matrix; it's actually applying it to the whole geometry of the content. And but you can turn this off, and that's the property called apply matrix. If you turn this off, then it'll not bake it in; it'll store it in the internal matrix. And so this is kind of confusing, but we decided we kind of need it both ways, and we decided to bake it in by default because that's the easier thing to deal with. Because then you only have one coordinate system. You know, if you make a drawing tool and you have nesting, and at any level of your nested scene graph you have a transformation or a rotation, then your coordinates are getting really complicated. And when you teach, that's really confusing people. So that's why we decided to bake it in by default. But then you can turn it off if you want to do, you know, sort of like nested transformations and stuff, which you do a lot.
Yeah. One thing that I think is also sort of useful to know, and I promise you it's going to get more interesting what we're drawing. It's always when we start with just drawing circles and, you know, basic stuff, it looks very boring. But we're going to get into some cool stuff. But you can also, when you have create, you know, for example, a path, you can give it a name. And that's very useful for like accessing it and not having to like iterate through a list of children. You can name elements, and that makes interacting with them much easier. So that's just a useful tip. And there's oddly, I don't know how this is done, but there's like, you can also use a dot syntax. So
that's just JavaScript.
Yeah.
It's the
like,
same.
Like this.
That's a JavaScript
Yeah.
weirdness.
Yeah, JavaScript is cool. Weird and cool.
Yeah. You also, if you import SVG, it uses the IDs of your objects, and those become the names. So it's also quite useful. You can even name stuff in Illustrator and import it, and you can access it by name.
Yeah. All right. So let's do. Let's make a bunch of circles. So we're going to make. Here's like 20 circles. So we write a for loop. Create this. Set the center position. We can space them closer together. Space them further apart. And create a new path. The center with a radius of 20. Make them bigger. And set the fill color to be red and the stroke color to be black. And then I just want to show, this is a really simple example where we're going to grab the children from the active layer. So a lot of, like, when you're looking at paper code, there's a lot of this very dot syntax, project.activeLayer.children. That gets you the circles, right? You could store them in an array if you wanted to as well, but this is just a way of accessing them. And then we're going to go through and set the hue to be random. So we'll go through var I equals 0, I less than children.length. This is the number of children. I'm gonna grab the child and then set the fill color hue to be math.random times 360. So this is gonna make, okay, like, kind of random colors every time we run it.
You can do colored at random.
Color down, like
I think
this.
it's a word. Yeah, I think
Really?
I think we added that on actually.
Like this?
I think so. No.
Okay. It's okay. This works. So I want to show a few things. So
Yes, point at random.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So I just want to show you that we can have like this on this onFrame function. We can do something. So like every frame. So function onFrame. Before I attached this to a specific object. So I created a circle. I created a layer, and I said onFrame rotates. We also have function onFrame, which is like I guess attached to the view.
Yeah, this is just this is kind of a leftover from early days. We didn't want to. Yeah, we have these global functions. They get not magically attached to things. So this one gets attached to the view. If you have a global mouse handler, it creates a tool for you.
Yeah.
I'm not super convinced of that anymore, but that's how we did it.
So I really like, take this example. It's kind of ugly right now, but I was mucking around with this, and I'll just show you, how you might get to something more interesting. So let's put them all in the center, and let's like scale them by 10. So whoa, 1, 2, whoa. Okay, sorry. Whoa. All right, good. All right, so. And then I don't want any stroke color. Let's get rid of that. And then we can say, this is bothering me. I times 10. Okay, so pleasant. So now let's do I times 10 plus event dot count.
Yes.
Mod 360. So okay, that's a little bit better. Randomness was bothering me, but it's like really, it's a different way of thinking than when you're used to, for example, like processing, you would just be drawing circles every frame. Here you've made the circles, and then you're just going through and you're like manipulating the color. You're accessing the array and doing something with it. So in that way, it's a different sort of mental model, but it's something that I find really fascinating. All right. Okay.
I've got a question.
Yeah, of course.
Is there a way to get the thing that you've attached the onFrame function to?
This one?
Yeah.
It's the view. It's the view object. It's called just view.
So if you call view inside an onFrame function, it's going to be the view that you attach it to.
If you do, what happens if you do console.log this? Is it the view?
It's view. Pretty sure. Yeah.
And
Kind of view. It's an instance of that view. Well, yeah, it should be. I mean, at the moment, one sketch only has one view. We don't have support for multiple views, really. The idea was that we could eventually do that, but different views from the same scene graph, but at the moment we don't.
Well, I guess what I'm wondering is, say I had created 20 circles and I wanted each circle to respond to onFrame slightly differently.
Right.
Yeah.
So then I pass it 20 onFrame, but I want to reference the circle from outside the function. I want to get the circle from inside the function. So I know I'm working with that circle.
Then you have to attach it to the.
yeah, you have two options. One,
Go ahead.
I answer with my limited knowledge. You either can attach an onFrame event to each, onFrame function to each object, which we could very well could do here. Like you could say, path dot onFrame equals, function. We could like define something, and make, figure out what it should do. Or here we like iterating through the list. Because we're iterating, we know the position in the array, and then we can give them, like, that's how they have different colors, because we know that element 0 is 0 times 10, element 1 is 1 times 10. There's two ways of doing it. I'm used to OF or processing, so a lot of my code and the code that Gordian I have been writing looks like this, where we we sort of have a knowledge of everything that exists in the scene, and then we go through and manipulate each thing. But a lot of the examples, more sort of idiomatic examples, will have some functionality written inside of it, where you say like, on mouse drag, do this thing. So, we could very well write that. Let's see if on mouse drag equals, I'll see if I can write this right. Function event this dot position plus equals event dot delta. And then I can drag an individual circle, right? Like I've attached this function to a given object, and then I can, I don't have to in that way, a lot of the interaction models are very, very different than what I'm used to, where you sort of you're defining a function inside of an object versus having a global function that you iterate through the objects. In that way, you think about all the code to make an object draggable in processing or open frameworks, you have to record the state, and you have to figure out if the thing is hitting the thing and all this sort of stuff. You get a lot of that for free, with Paper.js. This looks really cool. Whoa. Yeah. Well, I'm so happy. Okay. All right.
It's a good example of this, the scene graph advantages, or what it means to be working with scene graph.
Yeah.
I think.
All right. I'm gonna paste this here. I'll add this to the gist, I guess. Make a note. Add to gist. This is cool.
When you set on-frame functions on items, what actually happens is that behind the scenes, the Paper.js keeps a list of every item that wants to be animated, and basically just loops through all of them and calls on-frame for you. So it's just kind of like a simplification of you having to keep a list. So, and a lot of the things that we do are kind of like that. It would be hard to do when you're learning, and so the system does it for you, and it feels like you're just attaching a behavior to an object. And that's what's really important to us, that it would feel that way.
So one thing that I really love also is that you can manipulate the segment. So if you have a path, the path is nothing in Paper.js. When you draw a circle, it's a path. When you create a rectangle, it's a path. It's like the pen tool in Illustrator. In the end, everything is just a collection of dots that are connected, and they could be connected with Bezier curves or whatever it is. And so here, when you're going to draw a circle, radius of 100, fill color red, and then I just said here that, so you have this array which is called segments. These are the actual, if you have a path, these are the dots in Illustrator. If you were to grab a path, you would see these are the keyframes that make up that path. And we can take the first one, number 0, and say selected equals true. And so now you can see here, it looks like if I was in Illustrator and I grab that point, it looks like you see the handles and stuff. And then here on mouse drag, I can take the segment and I can manipulate the position based on the event.delta. You can tell I love this event.delta. I'm so happy that it exists. It's feels very native to. So here I'm run this. Here I'm, because it's not.
It's point. Yeah, it's point and handle in and handle out.
Sorry. Okay, so here when I drag, I'm moving that point, right? So this is taking the path. It would be like in Illustrator if I grabbed that point and started moving it. I'm moving it around, right?
You see what happens to the bounds. It's quite nice. That's kind of complicated to compute. But it happens on the fly for you, which is also nice to know.
Yeah.
There's also stroke bounds that takes all the stroke styles into account.
Yeah. So this is I just want to say this sort of way of thinking about graphics is very kind of idiomatic to Paper.js. Is I have this path, and I'm going to manipulate a segment on the path, and I'm going to take the segment 0 and take the point and do something with it. Or I could take the handle in or handle out. These are I don't know which one is which, but as you go across, there's a handle in and then the handle out for every point. And so you can manipulate those. So here I'm taking one of these handles and moving it around. And it would be like if you were an Illustrator and you were doing the same thing. But the nice thing about paper is you have like access to these things, right? You have very like direct access to the things that make the graphics. You can, everything's made out of paths, and you can grab the handle in or handle out or the point from a given segment and manipulate that.
One thing maybe important to note is that the points are absolute coordinates in the document, whereas the handles, they're vectors, so relative to the point. And that's unusual for those of you who have worked with Bezier curves, maybe in processing, where every coordinate is absolute. But we found that that's mostly how you work with handles. They're tangents, and you kind of want to work with them in relative coordinates.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's maybe unusual is that we're talking of segments and not of curves. So we decided that in the anatomy of these paths, the segment is the first class citizen, and then the curves is sort of, we also have curves, a curves array, but that's more like if you want to maybe walk along an existing path or calculate the length of it or stuff like that, then you work with curves. When you draw, you actually work with segments, and that's kind of how you work in Illustrator again. Like when you use the pen tool in Illustrator, or what is it called? The feather tool?
Sorry?
In Illustrator, when you draw Bezier curves, it's just a pen, but it looks like a what do you call that? When you draw with ink?
Like a
fountain pen. It's a fountain pen. Yeah, so the fountain pen tool. Basically, we figured out, we realized that's actually the best way, in a way, to describe it, that you're placing these segments and you're describing the tangents in them, and from that comes the curves.
Yeah.
It seemed kind of more intuitive. But as you can see, we didn't, a lot of it is just kind of like piggybacking metaphors from Illustrator. We're not saying they're the best ones, but we kind of realized those are the ones people know and can easily learn. And a lot of the decisions we made were done for education in graphic design, actually, for programming or scripting in graphic design. So that's why.
Yeah, so for here, for example, it's all relative. So I'm making the handle in go in a circular path around, it's relative to this point, and then it's just going like with a radius of 100 at a certain rate, moving around the point. So
you could use the point object for this now, and use the object literal.
Oh, with
constructor.
like a rotate.
And then not even rotate, you can just do a new point with an object.
Oh, interesting.
And then length and angle,
Yeah.
and then it creates the vector.
Yeah.
So
Well,
you don't have to introduce math, sine and cosine, which is quite cool.
Okay, I don't know how to write that, but here, this is like, now I'm making all these handle-ins rotate. Like, I don't know, I have no idea what I'm doing. But this is the sort of thing where I really am like excited about, this is a kind of way, for me, it feels like you're just like making Illustrator drawings come to life, right? You're taking like the handles or the points, and then you're saying like, every frame, I want to do something with them. And a lot of what we've been developing with these masks is like drawing something, and then some sort of manipulation where we like alter the control points to make the shape change, or we rotate it, scale it, etc. A lot of it is this kind of very basic kind of things that you would do in Illustrator, but now you're doing them in code, and it's quite fun to play. All right, one thing that I love, I can't get enough of, is drop shadow. So I'm just going to show you stuff that I'm like absolutely obsessed with, which is that when you create a path, it can have a drop shadow. So here I've made a white circle. Circle doesn't have to be white. I can make it, let's make it black for now. And then you can give it a drop shadow. Here I've given it a drop shadow which is mostly red, or it can make it like 100% red. And I love this. This is like, for me, this is crazy that we have access to this. This is really exciting that you can, because it feels like something that's sort of natively baked into the browser, because you have this through CSS. It's also quite fast. So you can do blurs that are like just insane. It's insane to me, like, to have the ability to just say, okay, I want to blur with a radius of 300. And that, for me, that's really exciting. So there's a lot of visual qualities that I think are really interesting, sort of unique unique in terms of what you can make with paper. So I've been experimenting a lot with drop shadows, and in particular, you can get like when you start to combine gradients and drop shadows, you can create things that have a look that are really surprising. So here, for example, like this, is the sort of thing that looks kind of 3D, right? Because you have a radial gradient, it gives this 2D graphic a kind of form. I can make it a little darker. Let's call it, what's a darker color?
Forest green.
Forest, is that a,
I think so.
yeah,
Nice.
yeah, forest green. Wow.
Very good news.
All right, boom. And then, yeah, shadow color equals forest green. Oh, projector. So it's like, I put the green on the wrong object. All right, but you get the idea, right? You can create shapes that you can put gradients on. I'll explain a little bit about gradients, but there's a way of defining a gradient. A lot of times when I'm writing this code, I'll say like, I'll create the fill color, and then inside of the fill color, put the gradient. And a lot of it's like very JavaScript style syntax, where you have this very JavaScript object way of writing it. But I love this kind of look, and that's how we're doing in the paper, in this one, pebbles mask. Like these pebbles have like a little gradient on them, and that's what's giving them the 3D quality. So, they have a little bit of a radial gradient, and you're setting, where it looks a little bit like a light source. So it's a combination of gradients and drop shadows, and you can create these graphics that don't feel like 2D graphics anymore. They're sort of kind of quasi 3D, but there's some visual quality that I think is really that I'm quite excited about. Gradients. Here we're creating circles and the fill color, and then you have shadow color, shadow blur, shadow offset. A lot of this stuff's like very familiar if have used the drop shadows like in CSS. You can set the offset so you can make them like really far away. Like the shadow is like super far as the light source, or the shadow is like right underneath the object. So this sort of thing, like you'll get very different qualities as you start to experiment with the shadows. I think I did an example. I posted it today on Twitter, where this is actually this is off-screen. Oh, it's like the resolution of my screen has changed, so stuff is off screen. I can change that off. Sorry, I developed this code when I was not plugged into this projector, so sometimes you sort of hard code a number, but then your view is a lot smaller. It's sometimes really good when you're designing examples to use the view.bounds, and a lot of the examples on the Paper.js website will say like, take 40% of the view height, because sometimes you don't know what you're drawing into.
Responsive.
Yeah, responsive graphics. But this is like a kind of look that I'm really fascinated with, which is, this looks so much better on my computer screen than on this projector. It looks like really, it's like totally fascinating to me. It doesn't like show up very well on this projector, but on my screen, it looks like very smooth. And these are basically drop shadows, and the objects are off screen. So I've moved the circles that the drop shadows are coming from off the view, and then I've just put a long shadow offset. And then you get this like kind of weird airbrushy look, and just with the blend mode where you combine the drop shadows and get something that, So you could do this with shaders in C++, but it's this sort of thing like you gotta get it for free, and that, for me, that feels really exciting.
So this is the way we could add model blur, actually.
Yeah, just drop. Actually, there's a very good example of blurring. Oh, so yeah, this is an example, which is this is a code pen that I saw, which is actually like the lines look blurry, and it's actually just a drop shadow, which is the same color as the line itself. So that is like a fake glow. It's using the drop shadow to get a glow, and it looks awesome. Like it's like, you know, usually this kind of computer graphics, like this sort of, you know, angular lines will look really sharp, and now it just looks like an old monitor or something. It has this like weird old quality, and that's using drop shadow to do a glow, basically coloring the drop shadow the same as the line that you're drawing, and just, you know, setting the shadow offset to be right over it. So that makes the lines look pretty awesome. But yeah, you could. That's a good way of getting blur, or a sort of fake blur. Gradients, and then the other thing that I think is really useful is thinking about kind of more. So you can create gradients. So I'll make a circle with gradients just so you can see what that looks like. I am totally fascinated with gradients because it's the kind of thing where you could write a shader in GLSL or whatever it is to do this kind of code, but the fact that we get it for free because it's part of Canvas, like for me, that's very exciting. So here we're going to set the fill color, and instead of setting the fill color to be red or black or whatever, we're going to put in a gradient, and the gradient has basically called stops. This would be like if you're editing a gradient in Photoshop or whatever. These are the actual like points that you're trying to hit. So we're going to go from white to purple, and the radial is true, and you always set the origin and the destination. And I find it very useful to use the bounds of the object. When I'm thinking about the gradient, the object has this bounds, and a lot of times with the gradient, you just need to set the start and the end point. And this is like in Photoshop, if you're dragging the gradient tool. Gradient could be like way off screen, or it could be inside of the object. I find the bounds of the object itself to be really useful. So you can say, take the top left corner and the bottom left corner, or the bottom right corner, and then do a radial gradient. And here you can see like we're going from white to purple, but we could go in the middle like to pink. So we could set different stops there, so you can go from white to pink to purple. There's like really advanced ways of setting what percentage of the way through you want the gradient to be. So I'm not going to show you how to do that, but if you go to Paper.js and in the examples, there's like this crazy one, which is just all like, it's basically just animating the gradient stops. So if you can like create a cool look where you're just like moving the gradient, this is just moving where the gradient is coming from and then animating the stops and creating kind of trippy graphics.
You can drag it too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well,
if you drag it to the corners, you see the there. If you almost go to the corner, you see how it's like not in. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's weighted.
Yeah. So so I'm fascinated with gradients, and one of the things that we've been, and I'm basically sort of showing you the stuff that gets us really excited when we're working on this project, is that you can also make the gradients transparent, or you can make any of the colors transparent. So here we're going to draw like a background circle. Let's run this. So we have, everything's really big. All right, we have a circle in the background, and then we have this circle here with a gradient, and you can do things like take the path that we care about, grab the fill color, grab the gradient, set the stop 0, color.alpha. So this is like so many dots, right? It's like path.fillColor.gradient.stop 0.color.alpha equals 0. So we can make it transparent. And so you're basically making like, this part of the gradient is transparent, and you're getting this like a lot of what we've been experimenting when we've been working on this project is how you can get like really nice looks with gradients and transparency. So for example, like these kind of objects that have, that have a gradient and have transparency. And that's the sort of stuff you might be used to if you're using Illustrator, but to be able to kind of like work with that computationally, for me, that's really exciting. There are some examples of really nice use of gradients. This is, I don't know how to say this artist's name, Raphael Rosenthal. Yeah, this is a project which is written in Paper.js, which is just a kind of beautiful maze, which is using gradients. So the same way that like trippy graphics was, you were seeing the gradients kind of pulse out from the center, this is like defining a maze and then having this kind of graphics move along it. I think it's really kind of pleasant and interesting. And there's some examples, like, I think a lot of times when I'm thinking about Paper.js, I look at his work because there's a lot of graphical examples that, this is the sort of thing that are kind of idiomatic to creating graphics in the browser and using gradients, and you're getting these kind of, for me, I think there's something like kind of interesting about studying this work as a, source of inspiration, or thinking about how we can, if we have these things which are sort of natural, like drop shadows and gradients, how can we play with them and manipulate them, and what sort of visual form can we make? Something fascinating like that.
I got a question real quick.
Yeah.
Can you go back to the sketch?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this might be something trivial, but the origin and destination of your fill color are top left and bottom left.
Yeah.
But it kind of looks like the gradient goes from top left and
Oh, because it's
bottom
radial. We could say bottom right.
oh, it's radial.
It's radial. But if we say, yeah, sorry, I think I had bottom left because it was non-radial. So typical gradient, you can have a gradient which is like linear. So I think when I wrote this code, I started with a linear one, and that's why I put it in the bottom left corner. So it doesn't matter. If it's linear, it's just.
So for a radial gradient, only the origin matters, right?
Well, here, if I say bottom right, it's going to go diagonal. So this is like, if I say from top left to bottom right, but it's a linear gradient. It looks kind of radial because it's on a circle, but it's like going from top left to bottom right. I think when I started, I just started with this, and I was like, how do I make this better? So then I added the radial, but I probably is more proper for what I'm doing to say bottom right, so that it goes, let's make this not transparent, so it's like really going from, let's say it's white here and purple here, and then that's maybe a little bit better for this. And then here we can set the color to be, the alpha to be 0, and we can, move it around, and you get the idea that you can, make, I think, really interesting visual forms when you start to play with gradients and opacity and do stuff that is just not as easy to do in traditional like processing or OF, where you'd have to create a mesh, and you'd have to like color the vertices and do all sorts of stuff that we have kind of for free here. For me, that's pretty exciting. There's a couple of other things that I think are really interesting to explore. And then these are, again, kind of examples that are based on problems that we were trying to solve. So for example, here, there was one mask that we were designing, circle, I mean, some of these masks need better names. Mask, paper cut mask. Circle overlay? Yeah. So this mask in particular was one where we had a drawing, and when we started, we were like, okay, how do we do this thing? We started with just an Illustrator sketch where we had a visual idea that we wanted to make, where we're like, okay, how do we make this thing? And the first thing that I thought about is we want to have overlapping circles, but we want to be able to see through them, right? We want to be able to look through these circles and see through them. And my first thought was that I'm going to use the polygon clipping. So there's a Boolean operations in paper.js, where you can take two paths, and say like, what is the union or I forgot the names. There's a union and intersect. Subtract. Divide. But it's like the Pathfinder tool in Illustrator, where you have two paths and you say, what's the, like, it's like the Boolean and, or the Boolean or of these shapes, and you get a result, which is the intersection. So my first thought was that I'm going to start with like this one, and then subtract this one, then subtract this one, then subtract this one. So it's really complicated. I started to write this code, and then every time Gordy saw me, I was like I was getting frustrated, like sweat was pouring down. And then I discovered something really clever, which is that you have blend modes, and the blend modes in Paper.js are really interesting. So one of the things that you can do, so I'll start with a really simple example. So I started just experimenting with various ways of drawing. And one of the things that I like is that you can draw, for example, let's set the stroke color to be red so you can see what I'm doing here. So I started with the basic idea where you might draw a circle and then set like the stroke color to be a certain way. And in here we're going to draw like what we want to see. We want to see like this outline is what we care about. And then I'm going to draw a circle on top of that. So
how do you toggle the comment?
Sorry?
How do you toggle the comment?
Oh, I'm just getting comments like
on the selection block.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Didn't know it works.
It's like what I do in Xcode. It works.
Cool.
So here I draw like 3 circles, right, on top of each other. And so I'm not using any clipping or anything. I'm just saying like, here this is, this is red and this is red. I'm drawing the black thing on top of that. But then the cool thing, so let me make this white now. So the crazy thing, I'll make the background orange so you can see what I'm doing. So so now we've drawn we've drawn these circles on top of each other. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all these things in a group. So circle 2, and circle 3, I'm going to throw inside of a group. And a group is like what we mentioned before. It's like a layer. You basically take things that you care about and you put them together inside of something. And then I can set the blend mode on the group to be additive. So I'm drawing into the group with this kind of coloring. And then when I set it to be additive, now what I render is actually just the whites. The black doesn't add, it's a different blend mode. And so this actually allows me to create kind of graphical looks that I can see through. So all of those overlapping circles, I can see through them, and I can draw it the way I want, and then get this end result. And it's kind of it's interesting. So some of the stuff that we've been experimenting with is like these kinds of things. Like how do you do these sorts of looks where you might have like a line that goes over another line. And this is actually, this one isn't finished, but this arc here is actually, I'm drawing it a second time in black figure. And that's how it's like going on top of those other lines. There are a lot of like little graphical tricks that are the same sorts of things that you could do in Illustrator that we're able to do here. Because a lot of that stuff is, this blend modes is like, that same way of thinking, where you might like design, you might solve a problem using blend modes, and then you don't have to use complicated geometry. The Boolean operations is really cool, but sometimes you can also solve stuff really easily with drawing.
Well, especially if you only want to have a result on screen, and you're not interested in like the resulting geometry for further processing or print or any of those things.
Does anybody? Is this cool? Should I keep going like this? I have a few more, and then maybe we can jam.
Break. Next break.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Want to take a break?
Yeah, the restaurant is in the hallway to the left.
There are people smoking weed outside. You can join them. Smile.
I have a few more of these kinds of examples, and then maybe we can jam for a bit. You can try sketching yourself, and Jörg and I are here to help, and Gordy also. And if you have like, deeper like JavaScript questions, you can ask your, and if you have more like practical questions, you can ask, or not practical. If you have more like beginner, what was your experience type questions, you can ask myself or Gordy. But is this cool? Are you enjoying this? Yeah. Okay. All right.
If you're trying to do some exercise yourself, maybe you can join Google Chat and do screen share.
Oh,
So
okay.
everybody else can see it.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. Are there people on the Google Hangout?
There has been 1 to 5.
Okay, cool.
I tweeted the other link, the YouTube one.
Oh,
But
okay.
I should then do that one. Right?
Yeah, 'cause
you sent it to me.
Yeah, the Hangout's live, and then if everybody joins,
Cool,
you
cool,
can do screen share your code.
The Hangout kind of.
Okay, I'm gonna send you the link
I
again.
usually am the one, I'm teaching now, but I'm usually the one on Periscope. I really love to do Periscope.
But well, next time I can come early, or we can set up early, and then we do a screen share,
Yeah.
so everybody can see the code.
Just in general terms of reference, like
Yeah.
for example, just like in different downloads are, is that, or any of the other.
Yeah, of course.
Or is that mostly just like paper guidance reference?
Yeah.
Or is that-
I mean, from my experience, you get a lot of the questions answered in the reference. Sorry, let me close this first.
Let's join it.
Okay.
Join first and do screen share. It's really hard. They can't see it.
Okay. You watch live.
Oh no, that's
Okay.
Inception.
That's YouTube.
I'm so confused. All right, what do I do now?
Do the Hangout.
Here?
So you close this window and then you join the Hangout that you're invited. That's in the chat window, right?
I don't. Momo, can you send me that chat link again?
Yes.
All right. I can't do it. Like, I find it hard to do two things. So I have found that a lot of times when I'm like an answer to your question, when I'm interested in a certain thing, I'll usually just search paper.js gradients, and that'll usually take me to the page. And I'm happy. Not everything will have a kind of code sketch that you can run, but a lot of the most important ones will. So I usually am like happy when I see this, and if I don't see this, then I try to search around to find a sketch that I can run that shows the thing. So a lot of them will have like this kind of like thing, an actual code sketch,
Yeah.
but some of them won't.
It's a lot of work to do, so we don't always do it.
Yeah, and if they don't, I like try to find it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's like typical code style where you're like, paper.js, whatever, and try to find some usage of it.
There's also, when you download the actual package, like a zip file, you get a folder of examples.
Yeah, there's actually good in the download. There's more examples that are on the website.
Yeah, that's kind of a mistake. There's a lot of construction sites in this project, like in most of these projects, I guess.
Examples, there's like stuff that look more like tests in some way, like SVG importing. There's a lot of like tests, like showing you different, or just making sure it works with different things. So some of them that are really fun, like the tools. I didn't even know the tools one. I thought that these were all broken until I started to draw. So I think Gordy showed me these tools. I thought they were all. I didn't realize that you actually have to do something. The tools like are different types of drawing tools. So some of these are not on the website, but you should poke around because there's a lot of stuff like this. Like, these things look awesome,
If you go to scripts, I think it is, scripts folder.
Yeah.
And then blend mode, that gives you a list.
Oh,
and
yeah.
you see which ones are native.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Oh, this is really useful for me.
Yeah.
All I do is I just look at the stats.js and just find out if it's native. If it's slow.
And you see, it's only, actually, R is not native. So you might want to find out.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it's probably really fast because it's only R, but
Yeah.
There's probably another one that will do something similar, like screen.
Yeah,
So that probably does the same thing.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and then below, if you scroll down, you see what gets exported, and I think they didn't work then, but I think I fixed that. I think now you get some working and it's cheaper.
Oh, cool.
It's the project is in a bit of a state of transition right now because I'm working towards 0.10.0, and I've made a mistake where I accidentally deployed the development version online, but left it because I thought I will be publishing within a days, but then other things interfered, and I still not published the new version, but it's gonna come shortly. But yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot more stuff in the download that has been helpful. Like, you know, we had some problem with load or something about SVG, and then there was an example in the download that sort of showed, you know, that what we were trying to do is possible. So, I recommend trying to download, and if you hit the tools folder, draw something. You definitely need a text that says to draw something, because I thought they were working at first.
We're always happy for volunteers because at the moment it's mostly a one-man show. There's a lot, it's a lot. It involves a lot of works on different levels, and you always forget everything else when you're like focusing on one thing. But
But I love
that one.
This one is so much fun. Cool. All right, let's take a quick break.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's really nice to see how everybody else
talks about it. Yeah.
I mean, you know, for me, I'm often too close to this stuff. Yeah, it's like really helpful to see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really enthusiastic about it, but I don't know. I'm not like deep in the code, so.
But you know, really.
Okay, cool.
Super exciting.
Yeah,
really happy.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. For me, it's been really fun.
It's enough proposals, missing functionality or things that you think are.
Yeah, I'm starting. I just posted an issue today where it's like I don't exactly.
You're hitting a bug there.
Yeah, it's like I don't exactly understand stuff that is not documented. I don't. It's kind of like I don't really know if I'm using it the right way or the idiomatic way of using it.
Yeah, I have to look into what's happening.
Yeah.
Not sure it's. Are you sure it's?
It looks like half the time it's degrees and half the time it's ratings. I put for each one I posted like what it does and then what I think it should do.
It could be just like accumulating the rotations and then it looks like it's.
It could be. I mean, I'm just scaling them differently. Like I thought it was accumulating, and that's why I started putting everything in groups. But then I was trying to think about pivots today.
You know how I said that in groups it'll pass down.
Yeah.
The transformations of the data. So,
right, but it's like what I'm seeing is like yeah, take a look at what I'm seeing. I mean, I put examples of each one.
I saw it.
So I sort of like, the sort of thing like looks wrong, and then I change one of the things from, you know, like degrees to radians, and it's right. And what I think is happening, my intuition is that internally you might be converting when you call rotate, and you might think about groups differently than paths. And so there's something like I don't exactly understand.
It's possible that I'm forgetting the conversion somewhere. But and one thing, you know, you were asking about rotation.
Yeah.
And I meant to explain. So the thing is, we don't have. If you don't bake in, let's see.
Yeah.
So we have matrix, right? We store in each item there's a matrix. And then a lot of the items bake in the transformation, so their matrix is actually always the identity matrix. But if that's not baked in, then only then rotation actually is meaningful.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if it gets baked in, then rotation will always be zero.
Right.
See what I mean? Because it's converting, it's changing the children. And then rotation is actually not a property, or I mean, it's a property, but there's no value. It's actually it's decomposing the matrix.
Right.
And trying to rotation. And if you mix rotation at scale or rotation at skewing, then you get different rotation values. It's not
Yeah,
like
I understand. I think that the challenge that I have is that I really want, as somebody who's sort of used to, I understand the rotate function, but as somebody that's sort of used to doing this stuff a little bit more manually, it's very useful to have access to the dot rotation. So I don't know if I'm doing it wrong, but it seems like what I'm trying to do generally works, but then there's some discrepancies. Like sometimes it feels like degrees. And sometimes it feels like radians.
I think you're not doing it wrong. I think it's about.
The other thing is that you haven't really exposed me.
No, I know.
For that reason.
Yeah.
So I
Some
don't
things
even know
are
if
kind
I'm
of doing because we're still at zero. And some things are sitting on the fence. Like, I don't want to document it too much, but yeah, like change or I understand. It's so much work.
Yeah.
You know all about that. How do you do documentation for book framework?
We have people helping, but it's a real big challenge.
You're doing a lot of that.
I was, but I'm not as active anymore. We just had a big documentation.
I need to start doing those things so I get more people.
Yeah, there's a lot of.
It's really exciting. Not finished yet. Thanks for feeding me. Now we need to get him up to speed. It would be nice to do this speech or even now for the rest. Because we're still doing more.
Yeah, we should do a Chinese.
Yeah. Or is it working? No, that's yeah, meeting tomorrow. That's why I'm here. I had this
At the same time.
It's communication. But actually, you know, the cool thing about this is that we love trying to program here, which is like we like teaching database or in design technology or in communications, which is pretty cool. Yeah, it's more fluid. It's more fluid.
Yeah, but you also don't get accomplishments.
You don't have to.
Where
Yeah.
You didn't go to
I didn't see any of the troubles with that.
No?
So we used to like or we find well, 3 years ago.
Yeah. That's great. I saw your last one. It was you know, so it's funny. He was playing with someone spray painted.
There's always some sort of.
Oh, that can you just screenshot now?
Yeah, sure.
I tweeted at you.
You tweeted at
We're not feeling enthusiastic about ours.
There's a client.
I don't know what it is.
Do you know she gets
Right, so
or you
glass installation.
Julia.
And there's more kind of like
I know more.
yeah. Just kind of like hybrid.
I started to talk
Great. Cool.
Yeah, that's really.
Great.
Isn't it nice that?
What?
It's pretty nice.
Oh, but I
Not too intense. A lot of
but I was just a little curious. Now, basically,
Increase, you know, Twitter.
with all properties.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a big thing. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So in those frameworks, like model and in this case, you are going to like the model.
Right. Yeah.
So it's kind of there's a lot of possible.
Yeah.
So if I want to tell a house,
Yeah. Right.
and a house object knows that you have to know what a house object.
Yeah.
Okay, have something in mind how they work.
Right. Yeah.
So when you what you are starting using it, you're always looking at like one of these hot objects and then you want to create a house.
Well, what we've done is we use a kind of object-oriented approach when doing this coding for this project. So I don't know how familiar you are with JavaScript. But you have in ES6 and the newer versions of JavaScript, we have pretty good support for objects. So I'm used to object-oriented programming because I'm coming from C++. So we use typically. Are you familiar with JavaScript?
I think okay. Basically subclassing.
Yeah, I mean the thing to say is that typically when you do object-oriented stuff, it used to be more like verbose. You would be using this prototype thing and like creating functions. In ES6, you can define classes, and it's easier to create objects. It's like kind of like syntactic sugar that makes it easier to do. So when we're doing this kind of coding, we typically, because we're using Chrome, you can there's a way to write something where you say use script, which is like a script mode for JavaScript. Using JavaScript is very permissive. When you do the script mode, you can have access to some advanced functionality. So in this way, we're creating this one, for example, is the one with the circles that spin around our face. And here, I have different properties that I would store for a given circle, like energy and how scale, and rotation, angle. So it's very similar to how in processing OF you would create an object that has some properties that you care about, and then it has a shape inside of it. And then when it on its update function, it manipulates the shape.
So it basically just wraps together. So you deal with your objects, like they themselves.
Yeah, I think you could do it like inside. Yeah, in this case, we have a class that has a shape inside of it. You could also have a shape that has like functions inside of it. I would never program it. Like I showed you that example where I added like a on-mouse drag function to a given, all the circles. But we've been doing it like this because it's just easier. This is more like. This makes more sense. I have a constructor and I have an update function. And the update constructor like overlays all the shapes, and the update function manipulates the shapes.
So you sort of like have your own run and you call.
Yeah, exactly. So to explain how it's structured at the main level, this is the main app, this main JavaScript is like, open up the data player. This is loading the JSON data with the face information. This is the stuff. This is like creating the root layer, and then this is the GUI stuff. And then on the on frame, I like update the stats, update the data, update the mass manager. I tell the mass manager to draw. And the mass manager. So what each of these masks has its own layer that it, has its own layer that it knows about. It might have layers inside of it. And when the mask is activated, I make that layer visible. I make other layers invisible. So you can hide layers. So you basically at the start of this app, you sort of create all of the graphics. Like a part of the system that you can make new things and delete things. But a lot of people have done is just load in SVGs and create all the shapes. So you have this really complex structure. But I'm only making for a given mask. I'm only making that layer and the next layer. So basically, it's kind of the way we've structured it is sort of object oriented. Just making the coding. It's probably good. I mean, it's easy enough to read this code. We haven't. It's not super well documented, but we have the mask manager. It creates an array of masks, and then it loads them in. And then
masks because these are masks, not because of.
Sorry.
I was thinking about it.
No. This is masks, masks that you put over your face. So the mask manager has an update function, and then it tells the current mask to update. So it's very similar. For me, this looks like something I would create from similar processing. I would have an array of objects and tell the object type. So I'm basically, this is a good example for a more complex project.
I was wondering if a different framework to thinking about this,
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm really not used to JavaScript at all. And for me, being able to do this and just have classes is amazing. Because when you're doing more complex JavaScript, when you have to use the original way of doing object-oriented prototype stuff, I don't understand them. I don't understand it. I don't like the way it looks. I don't know how to write it. It's very JavaScript-y. And for me, this is really as close to C++ as I can get.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff where I just can't believe that it works. Where you're you want a new property and you just make it. It's there's a lot of stuff where it's I can't believe you can code like that. But it's quite cool. There are instances where there's things that, because certain things are asynchronous, loading SVG is asynchronous, so we ran into a lot of problems where in the setup function we would load an SVG, and in the update we would go to draw it, but it's not loaded. And it's a lot of that sort of asynchronous traditional stuff where you have to check it.
All the things that I found all of JavaScript.
I thought projects that sort of dedicated to deal with this essentially callback stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You have all these dependencies that
Yeah.
how you want to choose get a callback.
Yeah. The thing that I don't understand is when JavaScript programmer scopes, and when you call, you're call a function or make a callback, and the scope is changed.
That was actually my question on frame. It's because you can't I was surprised at this work, so they really have done something super interesting to capture that.
You gotta ask because I don't know if it works, but I feel like I don't know. If it works, it works great. Yeah. That is the kind of thing that I've done in the paper script stuff. It's quite easy, but I don't know. There's a lot of stuff happening under the hood where it might be binding, calling the function with the bind. I have no idea. We've had trouble with that in the past, and that's something that Gordy and I, because we're not used to JavaScript, when this changes, these are the things that you have you don't know what's going on. I can do that. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. We can. Yeah, what I use, there's an asynchronous SVG loader where you can load the SVG in. So in the examples that I'm using like a separate file. You can also embed the SVG in the HTML file itself and then grab it.
As a string, right?
Yeah, you can load a string as well. Yeah, exactly. There are examples on the documentation where it loads like a string, like passive string for the SVG. But we've been using external files. I mean, I'm trying to go through. Let's see. Yeah, it's the kind of thing that it might be good for your. It might be a good your question. Maybe we'll start jamming and look at the code. I don't know enough.
You said something that's on point.
Yeah. I know it's real. I know, but I didn't write it, so I don't know anything about it. So I'll show. There's an example that I have, which is about where we create kind of random shape. So I'll show that, which is using like randomness to generate the shape.
Is that super satisfying
Yeah.
visual?
Okay, good. Okay.
So the question about importing from Illustrator, so when you
Yeah.
export from Illustrator, you basically get like a HTML, like a XML representation of it. Is that what that?
Yeah.
Is that imported?
We've just been importing it using the asynchronous. There's like a load SVG functionality. So that's why we have to run it as a server, because you can't, there's like cross domain or whatever. So you can't like run it locally without running it as a server, without some flags for Chrome. Yeah. So, but that's much easier because then but the only downside is that it's asynchronous. So you have to be careful. Like, we had a lot of issues where we just didn't we're not used to this kind of programming where we'll put it in, but it doesn't exist yet. And you have to check if it doesn't exist. And those sorts of things. Yeah, but you should ask Gordy about that because he was like perfected that workflow, and that's how we did a lot of prototyping at first, which was just like he just drew a bunch of maps and then he defined he had some sort of script where he would create the layers and then he could export each element individually to its own SVG. It's like he had a whole workflow that was done. And the thing that he did with the pivots is really amazing because he basically he does everything in layers and then he defines the pivot position with a fake object. So he'll draw where the pivot should be. And if you've done like 3D stuff, it's like using a null, where in Cinema 4D or whatever 3D program, you would put like an empty point sometimes to represent something. And he's doing that in the SVG. It's really complex. Yeah, it's cool. You should ask him. It's like he discovered this way of working that I don't understand it at all, but he's able to make these very complex maps where all these physical relationships are encoded in the SVG file. Yeah, and it's kind of why I chose paper, is that I wanted to have that quality. Like I wanted to be able to just like jam in Illustrator and draw stuff, and
What is your work like?
My workflow with Gordon, so Momo and I have been sketching, making drawings, and then a lot of times what will happen is, or like an Illustrator, or, on paper, and then a lot of times what will happen is that I will find a reference, a design reference, or make a sketch, and then send it to Gordy. He'll make like an SVG drawing, like he's basically an illustrator, like jamming. And then he'll load it in, and he'll do it kind of like in the most primitive way, maybe uncolored or unstyled. And then I'll focus on the animation and the reaction and a little bit of the style. So a lot of times what I'm doing is walking around with drop shadows and like trying to change the scale of things and trying to figure out how to make something like pop more when you move or rotate or whatever. And that's been really fun because we like, I come in at a high level, he like takes that high level to like a mid level, and then I sort of jump in at the low level, and we've been able to generate a lot of mass from that. And then for each of these masks, we haven't parameterized a lot, but we'll be able to take any like mask design and then generate 4 or 5 with different looks, or start to parameterize. Like we haven't even.
Yeah, that's where I was.
When we started, we made a crazy GUI for everything, and then it was so hard to use. Like you had every element had all these parameters, and so we've tried to stay away from that. But then at some point, we'll start to add sliders and say like, okay, let's really fuck with things now, and say like, does this make sense to make this random or change over time, or could you take like 4 or 5 parameters and then generate 3 more masks? Yeah, exactly. So we haven't done that yet, but that's something that I think, like, once we have, 30 or 40 masks, we'll start to, experiment with how to make more from what we have. So. All right. Do you want to get started again? Okay. Wow, this is so confusing. Oh, the delay is not that long.
No, because you're on going out, you're not on YouTube.
Okay, sorry.
So can we get everybody to email screen share? To join the Google Hangout and screen share your slide.
How do we get to the Google?
Okay.
Zach, can you tweet the link again?
Yeah, but let me keep going. I think let's do this later because Oh, okay. I want to keep going with this. Yeah, I don't want to do this right now. I want to focus on sketching. All right, so everybody, let's come back. I'm gonna jam and show you some more things, and then I know the workshop's only till 4, but I'll be around. I need to test something at night here, so I'll be around till it gets dark, I would love to hang out and just like, if you have questions, you want to jam, you want to make stuff. Also, if you want to see like this crazy system that Gordy's developed for exporting, it's pretty insane. Or talk to Jurg about, operator overloading in JavaScript or funky stuff. All right, so let's go back here. There's a couple other things that I think so this group and blend mode, I think this is really powerful. Like this idea that you can draw and then you can apply a blend mode to your group. One of the things that I love about like sort of working with paths is that you can do you can like smooth and do interesting effects with paths. So I've created here, there's path.star. This is a way of this is a shape where you can define a kind of programmatically a star shape. The number of points of the star and the inner and outer radius of the star. So this is a really basic thing where I've said, the number of points should be 5 plus random between 0 and 5. So every time I run this, I get a random number of points and then slightly random radius. So the radius can go from 150 to 250 and the inner radius from 50 to 30. So, we can change this, but just so you see, it's a kind of, slightly random. We can make, potentially a lot of points or et cetera. But the thing that I find really fascinating is that you can take this shape, which is kind of plain, right? It's just a star shape. But there's a great feature in Paper.js where you can simplify. You can take a path and it basically fits a curve along a path. It's something that I find really fascinating, and we use it in a lot of different places. But here I'm going to take the star and I'm going to clone it. So any object, okay, this is confusing me. Any object, you can say .clone, which is actually like a deep copy of an object, right? It's like copy and paste in Illustrator. So if you have an object and you want to do something to it and you don't want to mess with the original, JavaScript is kind of passed by copy. If you say var A equals B, it's in their objects, it's like you're setting A and B now equal the same thing. But clone is a way of actually duplicating. So we're going to clone the star, set the fill color to gray, set the alpha to 0.5, and move it over. So we basically copy the star and move it over and make it gray. But then if we call simplify, what's actually happening is we're taking the path and we're fitting a curve to the path. And there's a lot of functionality in Paper.js that's about dealing with a set of points and then fitting a curve to them. And there's different different types of curves that you can do and different ways of doing it. But I like to show this. There's an example on the front page of Paper.js, and I didn't even know this till much later. So this is like a kind of fun example where you're like, oh, look at the smooth curves, and then if you click, this is actually what it's made out of. Right? It's just a few points that are animating back and forth, but it's that simplify routine, which is actually fitting a curve to those points. And for me, that's something that's kind of fascinating. Like, I'm not used to thinking about graphics in this way, where you have like very few things that are doing something here, like very few points that are actually animating, but it's actually like the curve function, which is giving you all that extra information. And it's also it adds a little bit of flavor to the to the shapes. And so here it's adding a kind of, I like this sort of funky flavor where you start with a star and then you wind up with this like kind of weird shape that is coming out of what it feels like to actually run a curve through those points. And I don't know, Jörg, maybe you can tell us what the simplify is doing.
Yeah, basically it's trying to smooth putting this thing. Okay, taking all the points, not the handles, it ignores the handles, and it's trying to put a Bezier curve or a sequence of Bezier curves through those points with the minimum error that you define. Basically, you have an optional parameter that you can pass, and that's how much error you allow.
Okay.
Like the default is 0.25 or something.
So what should I try?
Well, if you go higher, it'll be it'll match
less.
Less, yeah. But this is, the way, this is supposed to be used. Simplify is actually when you build a drawing tool that is using mouse data. Let's say, you have mouse events and you get a huge amount of points, especially if you move slowly. There's an example on the Paper.js website. So you get like tons of points, and you want to just fit the curve. That's what it's called, curve fitting, basically. You want to fit curves through that. That's what you would use simplify for. Maybe the name wasn't so well chosen. In a way, you should have called it fit curves. Would be the better name for it.
So here, this is like telling you how much saving you're getting. So usually when you're drawing with a mouse, you have so many points because every mouse drag is an event. But then when you let go, it actually fits a curve through. Yeah.
And you get the smooth function, which is maybe more regular in its behavior and more predictable.
Smooth.
And smooth is not changing your segment or the amount of your segment.
Yeah.
So if you create a path and you add 10 points and you smooth it, it will still have 10 points. But what it does is it calculates your handles to make it smooth. And there's different approaches to do so. If you don't pass the parameter right now, it's using a method that's soon going to be deprecated because it's not symmetric.
Yeah.
But if you go to the documentation, you will see you get like Cottonwool ROM.
Yeah.
You get a couple of different methods that you can use. The one I like the most is continuous.
So what do I pass in? Just the word into it?
An object literal, and you write type. And then continuous.
Cool.
We're gonna
like
make
this?
One, we're gonna make that the default too. This is just symmetric. It's very similar to the other one.
Yeah.
The other one has a blockage. Asymmetric is kind of.
And Catmo ROM does something else.
They're also quite similar.
Ooh, nice.
Cool
I like this. This is funky.
Yeah, the cool thing with Catmo ROM is you don't get self-intersection with that one.
Oh, yeah.
But only if the factor. Here you get a separate parameter called factor.
Okay.
And at the moment, the default is 0.5, and at that value you don't get a self-intersection. And
Yeah.
then you can set it from 0 to 1. If you do 1, they have all different names. Like Catmo ROM. It's like another another specialist.
Yeah.
So you could randomize that factor and take the randomization out of points, and you could get some kind of like drawing looking thing, some kind of like stop motion-y
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If you have a little variation on that, yeah, definitely.
Could I do that on frame? No, function on frame. On frame. And is it painful to clone every time?
Yeah, well, if you end up with lots of copies, right?
Oh God. Oh, what do I do? How do I get rid? Oh, this is one of the painful things about Paper.js is that every time you make a shape, it gets added. So you have to be really careful. So
You just smooth it on the on frame every time?
Oh, because you're smoothing, it's actually fine to just smooth it every time because it's only using the points. The points are not changing, right? It's overriding the handle. So you
don't I need to copy the points?
You don't
when
need to. You don't
Oh,
need to copy anything
okay.
Because it's not destructive to the points. It's only destructive to the handles, and that's what you change anyway.
All right.
So.
Whoa. Where did we go?
Position.
Oh yeah. Oh.
It's
It's really cute. It was like.
Take all that stuff out, yeah.
Oh yeah. All right. Sorry. Boom. Whoa. Collaborative editing. All right. Do I have the factor? Have I done it wrong?
No.
Okay. I'm not seeing.
Oh wait.
You removed the randomization from the actual creation of that star.
Factor. Is it not factor? It should be factor. What
Uh.
am I doing wrong? It's probably me.
Yeah. It's okay.
Um,
Yeah,
I mean, this is new, so I'm
the
not quite
actual
sure.
factor controls and not parameterization. It's okay.
Strange.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure which version is actually online. As I said, that's
Yeah.
a bit of a mess. So it might be that that's not up to date yet. They're all actually the same things in that case.
Yeah. Well, what was the other one that we were doing? Simplify. Simplify, and
Simplify doesn't get any parameters other than that one value at the moment, which is that's kind of more dangerous.
Yeah, I won't do that. All right, sorry.
No, that's fine. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just,
Oh, because it's doing it to
actually
the point.
changing it, But it didn't change now because your points are far away, so it's not actually changing.
Okay, all right. It's okay. We get the idea. We'll work on an example. That was a lot live coding. All right. So, but I am actually really fascinated with simplify and smooth as a means of taking, these forms that we're generating, and I really like the catmul-rom. I forgot how to do it. Type catmul-rom, and like that's awesome. You can take a shape and then you can make it like much more interesting just by smoothing it out. I think that there's different examples of that, and that's something that I find really useful. So in the project that we're working on, for example, like this, there's this one here, line displacement. So like these lines are actually they're not that many points. They're just like a grid of points. And when the eye gets close to it, I'm moving the points away, and then I'm smoothing a line between these points. And that's what, that's what's creating that kind of look. It feels like, there's some quality to it that I think I wouldn't know how to program that. But that quality of like little bit of bending, for me, I really like. That's something that you get from using that smooth function. That's something that I've been kind of fascinated with, what that Paper.js gives you. All right, so let's take another look at simplifying paths. This is an example of a spiral. So if we, this is a sketch that I found. If we will draw it out like this. So here we say view dots, take the view.center, we're going to add 40 points. We could add, 80 points, spiral out, add just a few points. And we're basically going in loops, right? We're using cosine and sine to create spirals. So we're sort of moving in one direction and drawing spirals. The thing is, we're not using that many points. And so if you don't smooth, you actually see like what this thing actually looks like is, it's like this. Like this is the thing about that I think is really interesting about Paper.js is that a lot of times your graphics, like your underlying graphics could be based on very small amounts of information, right? Just like, 40 points. To define, in this case, it's like five circles. It's not a lot of points per circle. So you start to see actually like the vertices are really, really clear. But then when we add this smooth function or simplify function, you start to see it like produces this really nice curve. So typically in open frameworks, for example, you'd be like drawing hundreds of points, which is fine, but you'd be like computing each one of these points. But there's something I think really nice about here. We just have defined like 40 points, and then this function is putting the curves through them, and that's what's giving this kind of quality. And then there's like great things that you can do with this. So for example, I'm going to take this same code. We'll smooth it out. And then I love, so same thing as before. And then I really love the dashed lines. Like I'm totally obsessed. You can do this in OpenGL, but I'm like absolutely obsessed with dashed lines. Like I love the way this looks. Like this is very, kind of Illustrator quality to me. You can muck around and like, have like small gaps between them. It's a little too small. Small gaps in the dashed line. Let's make it a little bigger. Or and you can have like really big dashes. Like it's mostly there. There's like little gaps there. And the thing that I'm totally fascinated with is you can have big dashes and then big gaps. And so here we have there's like big dashes and big gaps, and I love it. It's like not the whole drawing is there anymore. It's just a little part, and then you can mess with the dash offset. So on frame, I'm just going to adjust the dash offset. So this is changing the offset position for the dashed line, and now it looks like we're drawing the line. The line is getting drawn out over time. Or we could have like a really big gap. So, I don't know how big it should be, but like maybe let's make it a little bigger. So I emailed Jurgen. I was like, how do I draw? I just want to draw a line. I want to like have a line that's constantly redrawing itself. And Jurgen suggested to look at the dash offset. And for me, this is like absolutely fascinating. Right? In open frameworks, I would write the code. I could write the code to do this, but the idea that we have a graphical thing that we can manipulate in order to show the redrawing of this line. I'm gonna make this faster. For me, I'm totally fascinated with this, and it creates this kind of look that I think is. It's harder to do in processing or OF. Like it's hard. You could code this for sure, but it's really nice to have this sort of dashed line that we can muck around with, and let's make this big. That looks, for me, this kind of stuff is really exciting. Yeah. So there's a couple of other things that I think are useful. These are just really basic examples. Let's do. Angle divided by clones. This is a little. I think. Oh yeah, sorry. So start with the original one. So this is like a simple example. You find this example on the website, which is you can create an object, which is just we'll make a circle. And when I run it, we just have a circle here. We're going to make 30 clones. We're going to go 360 degrees around, and you can rotate. You can clone the path, and then you can rotate it, and you can set the position of where you want to rotate around. So here we're just going to make 30 circles, and we're going to rotate around the top left corner. So it's the top left corner of the bounding box, so that's right about here. And then what we do is we are like go through and we are making like one and then rotating and make another one rotating. We make 30 of these things. And I started to muck around with this, and I think it's really kind of fun to just play. So instead of making 30, I'm going to make 1,000. I don't know. I don't think this is going to be fast if you wanted to animate them, but I just started to play, and you can do crazy stuff. Like it's fun to just get in there and say like, I want to change the point that it's rotating around. I have no idea what I'm doing here. I'm just plugging in numbers. And then the cool thing, the thing that I think is really fascinating is like, let's say you find something that you like. So it's like, I'm so excited about this cool, geometry that I've made. Then you can export it as SVG, and then it actually comes out. Let's see here. Boom. And so then you can be like, look at my great art. Yay! So if you had like something like a laser cutter or some sort of device, like I know Michael's been working with pen plotters, like you could create a drawing and then export the SVG, and then immediately you have this thing that you can start to plug in and work with.
Is SVG the main export type?
Pardon?
Is SVG the primary export type?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the only one that you can read in other software at the moment. There's no other format other than screenshotting. If you work in Node, then you can use the Node Canvas library has a PDF feature. You can use that to directly generate the PDF, but only in Node. But you can also export an SVG and then convert it to PDF, probably easier. But then if you want to store, I would use the JSON. But yeah, to output, I would use the SVG.
Yeah, the JSON probably has more information.
Yeah.
If you need to recreate the thing again, it's like the whole definition of the whole scene, but then the SVG is maybe less information.
Yeah, it's just some things you can't directly map to an SVG model, so it has to sort of emulate it. And you lose the information about what is a layer and what is a group. That's the main problem at the moment. But this one can actually be fixed, but we haven't done it yet.
The other thing to say is if you have a lot of objects, so that's really like inefficient. It's awesome looking, but it's very inefficient because paper, in my experience, paper gets slow when you have a lot of something. When you have hundreds of shapes, or for example, like a lot of clipping. Like we were trying to do something with a lot of clipping mass, and we couldn't get, it would get slow when you had 100, like a big grid of something. And there's another thing which is sort of important to know about, which is called symbols, where you basically can have a kind of definition for a shape. And it's a little bit, I don't know the best way to explain it, but it's a little bit like a cached version of the shape. And so it's just faster. So you sort of define a shape, and then you create this symbol, and then you can draw lots of them on the screen at a given time, and it doesn't have to do as much computing. Sort of computes all the properties or whatever it needs to do for that shape once, rather than if you have 1,000 shapes, rather than doing it like 1,000 times. So clone is if you want to make a lot of something, clone is a good way to get started, but you can easily hit a wall in terms of speed, and symbol is another way. So in this case, we're going to create a line, which is really straightforward. It's a line, if we run this, it's like a tiny line. It's like it's up here. You can't see it, but it's right here. And then we're going to turn that into a symbol. Then we're going to draw a grid of them. So we're going to, calculate a position across the screen. So a grid of 40 across, 40 down. They're going to figure out the point where we are on the screen, and then we're going to place the symbol at that point. So this is going to create 40 times 40, 1,600 of these lines. So if we did this by hand, if we created 1,600 paths, it would probably be really inefficient. But because we've created one symbol, it's faster. And then here we're just going to go through and grab, for the given active layer, get all the children. And on the mouse move, we're going to go through all of them, calculate the angle between the given position on the screen and the mouse, and then rotate the object to face the mouse. So let me see if sometimes you have to refresh the paper.js sketch. So now all of these shapes are rotating to face the mouse position. So it's the sort of thing that would be hard to do if you created 1,600 shapes, but because you create a symbol, then you can manipulate these like they're almost like references in some way.
Yeah, I use the metaphor of a stamp sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You make the stamp and then you.
Yeah. So that's the last thing. There's many more things to say about paper. So you know, I have tried to touch on the things that I find like really valuable for the kind of work that we're doing for this project. There are like typography, user interaction stuff. We talked about gradients. You know, the majority of things are, if you start to get a feel for it, like layers, groups, and paths, then that's the majority of stuff. There's stuff that I haven't touched, like raster. So I know you can take like things and rasterize them. So the same way in Photoshop you might have like a shape or like a path, and then you turn it into a raster. But I don't know what that's used for.
It's just a bitmap, actually.
Yeah.
It's just a name we use for. We couldn't use image because that's again occupied by the browser, so we called it raster just to have something short.
Yeah.
But it could have called it bitmap.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, but that's the basic, and then the sorry, tell me your name again.
Ying.
Sorry.
Ying.
Ying.
Yeah.
Ying was asking just about kind of how we structure, because it's a little bit different working in JavaScript, and I just want to mention a few things about the project that we're working on is it's called Mas que la cara, and this is a Spanish phrase that means more than the face. People think the word nobody knows where the word mask comes from, but this is a phrase that some people think the word mask comes from. So if you want to, you can kind of follow along with our crazy project. But one of the things that I wanted to mention, and how many of you in here do JavaScript stuff? So we've found, I don't know anything about JavaScript. I've only like mucked around with Electron and made some small projects. But one of the things that we found really useful is sort of ES6 syntax. So if you look through this code, you'll notice that at the top of all of our files, we use this thing called useStrict. And this allows you to use some ES6 syntax. We don't use everything. Different browsers are different, but Chrome, if you put useStrict in your JavaScript code, you can actually use the classes from ES6, and that's super useful because we are like C++ programmers, so we're used to object-oriented code, and if you learn object-oriented code with like traditional JavaScript, I find it really like super bizarre looking. So you're like, everything's like weirdly functional, and you have this prototype thing, and nothing, I don't know how to type it, and nothing makes sense. And ES6 classes is a kind of syntactical sugar, and it makes it much easier to use. So you have like a constructor, and you're basically, it makes some of the code like easier to write and to see. So if you look through our project, you'll see like a lot of kind of, it's not like deeply object-oriented, but we'll have, for example, like a mask, a class for the mask based, and the mask has a layer inside of it and turns the layer on and off, and then a given mask will extend mask base, and it has this kind of quality is a little bit like C++ style, where if you're used to creating projects in open frameworks, it'll feel a little bit familiar. Like we have a mask manager, and the mask manager has an array of masks, and it's a little bit like, we're like programming JavaScript in this very like C++ style, and for the most part it's working, but sometimes we are completely perplexed. So there's a lot of things that we don't understand about scope, and Gordy and I have been looking at each other like, what WTF sometimes, because there's a lot of things that don't make sense about this operator changing, and there's some asynchronous stuff that we also find a little bit difficult. But I would say if you're new to JavaScript, or you're just kind of playing, for sure you can do a lot of stuff just in PaperScript itself, but for our project it got more complex, and so we had to move to JavaScript. And I would strongly recommend, you don't have to use Babel or any kind of transpiler, but just looking at useStrict and kind of dabbling in more modern JavaScript is, if you're an outsider, I found this really useful. So,
it's a good moment to learn JavaScript now, I think.
Yeah, it's probably much easier to write than before.
Yeah. Finally cleaning up the language.
Does anybody have any questions? I would love to hang out and jam. So feel free. I mean, the workshop was till 4 o'clock. If you do you have any questions for me or for Jörg or anything, I would love to just hang out if you want to try stuff and just play around with the examples or the syntax or ask any questions. No, I'm gonna hang out here, and super happy to help with anything. If you want to ask, like Gordy's workflow is really amazing. The way he was creating this SVG file that has all this information. So if you're interested in that, for sure, ask him about that. If you have I find the operator overloading really fascinating. So if you're into like nerdy programming language stuff, like how you create something like PaperScript, ask Jörg about that, or the history of PaperScript. Or I know you're also interested in help. So help with documentation or examples. And so if it's the sort of thing where you're excited about this, talk to Jörg, or you want to hear from beginner's perspective, talk to me. So I'll just hang out. Any questions though about anything that I've talked about?
So if you're writing in an HTML document script tag or something, we can just write PaperScript right in there if we've linked.
You would call it, if you download that zip file, you see examples that do it. Basically, you load the library first, and then if you have a script tag that says in the type attribute says, there you see it, text / PaperScript, then it won't be executed as JavaScript, but then it just loads it. And it's loading it through XML HTTP request, which means you cannot run it locally on your hard drive, because or in most browsers you can, because it's a cross-origin request. So it's kind of annoying. Because how is that a cross-origin request when they're both in the same folder?
I'm gonna ask the files look like the examples locally, and it's doing things fine.
Yeah, because we're inlining them. So that's the other thing you can do. If you're inlining the code, then it's fine, of course.
Yeah,
but
you can
inline an SVG or whatever.
And this is why, exactly. This is why all of our examples are actually done this way. They're not stored in separate files. But you could move that code into a JavaScript file and then just load it there with the source attribute, like the library is loaded. But that only works if you have course. Course is fine.
Yeah, and then if you do, we didn't know that, and I think that's probably the problem that we hit right away. And if you can use JavaScript, and then you have you lose the object, you lose the operator overloading, and then you just have to write paper dot whatever. In this code I've been writing path.circle, but if you're not using PaperScript, you write paper.path.circle, and it's a little bit syntax is a little longer, but it's pretty much the same.
But you can import it. I mean, if you use module, what is it now called? In the new JavaScript syntax, you will be able to import objects from an external dependency, and then you can make it sort of global in the local scope. Or you can just write var path equals paper.path if you use path a lot. And then it feels like it's global. Or you can write var p equals paper, and then you don't end up writing paper all the time.
No, I feel very comfortable writing paper.path.
And there's a couple of global objects that are good to know about, project, but also view is global. So paper.view will point to the active view. What else is there? Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for starting. But it's quite easy to take a sketch that you've just written in sketch.paperjs.org and then put it into a self-contained HTML. It's really hard, especially if you download that zip file.
Yeah, you just take one of these templates and just wrap everything in a PaperScript. And we do a lot of sketching for solving a visual thing. We'll solve it in sketch.paper.js, and then we'll take that code and we'll just throw it into our JavaScript file and convert it or whatever. It's really easy. The tool is very helpful for just trying a small visual idea. And then I found it very useful for, I think it's kind of amazing for this sort of thing. had an issue, and then you can literally be like, I see this, and then you're like, but actually I really want to see this, and it's really useful for like communicating an idea, like a really short idea. I think the tool is very helpful for that. So we found it useful. Like Gordy and I, when we're working, we might solve something and then send a sketch that, sketch like a little link that says like, here's this like visual idea and how to do it. And then if you're smart, you will bookmark it. And if you're not smart, you have to go through your history, and your history looks crazy because the URLs are auto-generated. So.
That's a nice hack.
Yeah. Other questions about like usage or?
Do you have any examples on how to work with other libraries?
I don't have any examples offhand, but in the code for the masks, there's one example here, which is there's a couple of things. Like we import a noise library for Perlin noise, and we use that. And I've seen other examples that do that include that Perlin noise class. And you have an include function in PaperScript where you can
just in Sketch.
Oh, in Sketch. Okay, sorry.
Because normally
you would just
your
include
dependencies through an HTML app.
Yeah.
And you would just have it as a required script. But then in Sketch you can't do that. So we have a function called include, and you can give it a string that is the address of the library.
Yeah. We didn't.
And it needs to be able. Again, you have like cross-origin restrictions potentially. It's kind of.
Yeah.
It's kind of limited.
We didn't do much with like engines or other things, but we use this library called matter.js that is actually the same library. The reason that I found it is it's the same library that the folks from Mr. Kalia are using.
All right.
So it's just like a box2D type library, like rigid body physics. And so in order to use that, like in our project, the way we structured it is that we created a physics manager, because a lot of times you just need to have like a way of setting like the gravity and the bounds and adding objects to the physics engine and deleting them. So we created this physics manager object, and then in the bounce scene, I think there's examples where there's physics. There's like, sorry.
No, it was just like physics. I know.
Yeah. There's like calls to that. We created like a global object called physics manager, and there's calls where it's like remove all bodies, or like when I'm creating a thing, I'll like add it to the physics manager, and then I can query the physics manager for saying where these objects are, and then copy this position to the paper. So what I found that the way it works with this is that I basically like create. I think when the layer is hidden, I delete everything from the physics engine, and when the layer is shown, I like create a random object. So I say like I want to make 50 circles and with a random radius, and then set the position randomly, create the paths in paper, set the fill color, shadows, etc., and then I add it to the physics engine somewhere. Here, physics manager dot add circle. So there's like created some like global object that has some functions like add circle or remove all bodies, and then inside of this mask I can do things with it and then query. It's running a sort of internal simulation, and that's what's doing all the physics, like the balls bouncing off of each other. It's kind of silly because I probably didn't write this code, so it's like I'm not totally sure why I'm using this physics engine, but I just wanted to see how to do it, and then it's possible to connect like one thing to another. There are good examples, like on the Paper.js website. I think there's an example. The Voronoi. Voronoi. This is a good example of like this is a library where if you look at the code, it's like if you look at the source code for this. There's it's like it imports a library. It's not in here, but it's
Yeah,
in,
you don't see the.
you don't see it, but you see it in the HTML.
Exactly.
And it's like including a Voronoi library and then using it. So it's possible, like, like a graphics library. We use a Perlin noise library. It's possible to like import some code and then interact with it.
There's also the salty one, which is using the HTML5 sound, and it's loading.
It's not in.
Oh, Jesus.
Oh no.
Well, I mean, it's
Here, but it's
it basically loads this sound and does a FFT analysis and uses that to change the class. If you click, it flips it's left and right. So basically, that's just HTML5, not even a library. I mean, it's just the browser functionality that I'm using there. And if you click on source, you will see it's probably further down the HTML5 stuff. There's a lot of code because you're using browser stuff.
Window.audio context.
It becomes immediately complicated.
Yeah.
But it's definitely possible to do that.
Yeah.
That's actually cool. The HTML5 audio stuff is really powerful because it basically it's like almost like what do you call it? Like analog synthesizers where you have like you're routing things to each other. Yeah. You can do lots of things. But this is kind of crazy how complicated it is. You have to create a splitter object and you're analyzing left and right separately, etc. But so that's you're in the browser. You're not in a sandbox. I mean, the browser is a sandbox, but you can pull in a lot of things. And just because your scripts are scoped, it doesn't mean that you're not seeing things outside of the scope. You're seeing the global scope. It's just the global scope doesn't see you. Yeah. So it's and if you have multiple paper scripts or you want to exchange things with JavaScript and PaperScript, what I usually propose is that you create a global object on the window object. For example, window.app or something like this, and you just throw everything into your app object, and then because it's global, your PaperScript will see it and your global JavaScript will see it, and you can put functions onto that or values or whatever you want, and you can export things from your PaperScript. So if you have a function in PaperScript that you want to call from JavaScript, you can set that function on this app object, and then you can call that function from outside. And even though this function is doing some PaperScript magic, it will work because it's just JavaScripting it. Yeah. These are tuples, just
a lot of these are examples too have like little hidden modes. Like I think here, if you click, they make a heart. There's a lot of stuff I didn't know.
Did you hit spacebar on this one?
No. Oh, whoa. There's like a lot of hidden treats that
Jonathan Hockey was really having fun with the examples. Most of the good examples are about hidden design. Yeah. It's taken really, really far.
Yeah. But yeah, this one I had no idea until later that you could click and see this kind of view. But it's the sort of thing that like that's a clear explanation of why smoothing is interesting. That you can run the simulation with very few points, but then make this very complex shape. So.
And then Future Splash is using smoothing.
Yeah.
Anyone of you know what Future Splash is? Why it's called? It was the name of Flash before Macromedia popped in.
Oh wow!
It's like a little a little notch.
It's like the Yugo, the Yugo Nakamura. It's like gives me so much nostalgia. All you need to do is show this with like 4 colors, like the the one with the 4 colors.
Yeah, you're right.
That will look like Flash all over again.
If you hit spacebar, does it show the selection?
Whoa!
So again, you see it's not actually lots of points.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, that's the sort of thing that I find very surprising, is that you can do a lot with Paper.js with like a very small amount of points. Yeah. That's something that Gordy's been really interested in, and a lot of the masks, like we're not there yet with all of these things, but a lot of these are, should say, flower-shaped masks. Like these are like, like tiny, like 4 points or 2 points or something. Gordy, are these just 2 points? So it's like between moving the point and moving the handle, it's like pretty amazing that you can kind of get like this like weird quality, like it kind of like has a little tail or like bends a little bit. That's something that I think is very interesting from a kind of programmatic aspect. What you can get from it's like like real simplicity, like having, you know, just a few things and manipulating them in the right way versus a lot of points.
I think that was the origin why I did cryptography, because I've always been so fascinated by Bezier curves. Just you know, they feel so intuitive when you work with them, and you learn really quickly what their logic is, and they're actually mathematically they're really beautiful. When you have you ever seen the video that explains how they're constructed?
Yeah,
I mean, it's really crazy how simple it is, and I think it's such a good example of something that's abstract as a concept and, you know, mathematically beautiful, but then you can use it as a tool, and it's almost like it almost feels like you're working with a rubber. Is it called destroying tool? You know, the
yeah.
What did I call that? Exactly. So, but it's really that, right?
Yeah.
It really feels like that. It's quite amazing, I think.
Yeah. So again, here, like very small, you know, very few number of points that are making these shapes, and then you can kind of like jiggle them or make them rotate, and then get, you know, the shapes feel like they're more alive, and then you don't have like a physics engine in there. You're not like doing a crazy simulation. It's a much smaller kind of amount of data. That I think is kind of interesting to think about from a code perspective. Yeah.
I have a question. Have you found that working on the like handle in, handle out layers are like, is that something you do, or do you work sort of higher than that?
I haven't been doing that, but Gordy, you've been doing that, right? Like moving handles and stuff.
Yeah, there's it's like an angle, so you don't have to put the coordinates of each angle. You just need like 2 angles, and there's angle of 1 angle and there's angle for 2, and you just have offset, and you can just rotate it like that. So it's very useful. It's not like an Illustrator when you just need to like move 1 point, and then it's like a different way, just like rotating. You have a rotation of each point. And I found this very.
Yeah, there's definitely situations where you work on that level, I think. There's also, I mean, there's many ways around them that you don't have to deal with them directly. But, we try to make it as simple as possible to work on that level. I mean, probably you can always simplify it. But, there's something that just came to mind, but I forgot that. Anyway, we'll come back.
So, folks want to hang out. If you want to, welcome to. I'll stay and happy to answer questions, or if you want to try stuff, jam. I hope this was this good. Are you excited about paper?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I was quite nervous because this is very new to me, but it's one of the things that hopefully, like, it's been really it's made me really, really curious about graphics. And so some of the stuff that I get really excited about is like using these drop shadows and getting this kind of look that I don't know, like you totally could do in a shader, you could do in some other way, but it's because it's this way of doing graphics that I'm not used to, it's like every day feels like making these weird discoveries, and we've definitely been having a lot of fun. You know, it's not without its challenges, and JavaScript is not without its challenges, but it's been really, you know, super enjoyable, especially from a kind of graphic design perspective, trying to think about kind of design language. And then I'm super excited for you to meet Jörg, and that he's in town. This is like the most epic timing ever. So
that's coincidence indeed.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So thanks so much for coming.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a
groupie.
Yeah. Everyone has to stand up.
Okay.
Wait, which way is it going?
Just say hi.
Hi. Do you want to take a pic? You're gonna take a picture?
I'm taking pictures.
Okay, cool.
Did you record it?
Oh yeah, I'm still recording.
So
I'll stop now.
But stored.
You can say bye to everyone online.
Bye. See you.